You have probably been told your entire fishing life to never stop reeling once you get the lure close to the boat. Keep it moving, right? Well, what if I told you that old advice is exactly why you are constantly missing the absolutely biggest fish of your life? Welcome back to the channel. Today, we are talking about a totally mind-blowing reality of fishing. Why does pausing your retrieve right at the edge of the boat trigger unbelievably violent strikes from fish you literally did not even see? I promise you, by the end of this video, you will discover an incredibly unexpected truth about predatory fish behavior that will completely change how you finish every single cast. We are going to reveal the hidden reason why so many guys suffer through terrible days where nothing bites, completely unaware that the fish were right there the whole time. Have you ever had a giant fish break your heart and snap at thin air right as you lifted your lure out of the water? Let me know in the comments below, because we are about to put an end to that heartbreak forever. To fully understand this powerful technique, we have to look at why this specific topic is so deeply important for all fishermen. For decades, we have strictly been taught to cover as much water as physically possible. The common belief is that if a hungry fish has not aggressively bitten the bait by the time it gets halfway back to the boat, the fish is simply not there. Because of this deeply ingrained habit, most fishermen do the exact same thing for years. They focus entirely on the distant target, crank the handle continuously, and blindly rip the lure out of the water so they can immediately fire off another long cast. We treat the boat as just a standing platform, completely ignoring the highly critical zone right at our feet. But nature does not work like our impatient brains do. We are totally forgetting about the curious, cautious predators that silently track a moving bait for long distances without ever committing. Today, we are breaking down the wall of those bad habits. Picture a quiet early morning on your favorite lake. The water is smooth, perfectly still, and looking exactly like a huge sheet of dark glass. You cast your lure out toward a great-looking wooden stump, work it perfectly through the primary strike zone, and then casually reel it in the last 20 feet, just so you can hurry up and cast again. You casually lift the lure out of the water, and right at that exact moment, a massive swirl violently breaks the surface right at your feet. Water splashes everywhere. You just missed an absolute giant. Why in the world does this happen so often? As fishermen, we are deeply conditioned to think the strike zone is only out there in the deep water or near the specific structure we originally aimed for. We tend to treat the last few yards of the retrieve as entirely useless dead water. This is a massive, incredibly costly mistake. The dark water right next to your boat is actually one of the absolute highest percentage strike zones on the entire lake. But because you are already looking around for your next casting target, you completely ignore the invisible predator that has been silently tracking your bait for the last 30 feet. You have to totally change how you view the end of your cast. Let us deeply talk about exactly why a large fish follows a moving bait in the first place, without attacking it immediately. Predators like big bass, northern pike, and giant muskie are naturally curious creatures, but they are also incredibly efficient and highly lazy hunters. They will very often trail quietly behind a moving lure, just to comfortably inspect it closely. They want to fully see if this potential meal is injured enough to be truly worth the heavy energy of an explosive attack. As long as your shiny lure is moving at a steady, totally predictable pace through the water, the fish has absolutely no reason to rush the major decision. It just swims right behind the bait, staying perfectly hidden inside your blind spot beneath the heavy surface glare. You completely cannot see the fish looking at the bait, but the fish can clearly see your lure. If you just keep reeling smoothly all the way to the rod tip and suddenly rip the bait out of the water into the thin air, That fish simply turns around and quietly swims back to the dark depths. You never even knew a giant was right there. But if you quickly change the rhythm right at the boat, everything changes instantly. The fish is aggressively waiting for a clear sign of severe weakness, and a sudden dead pause is exactly the heavy trigger it needs to open its massive mouth and strike hard. Think about the underwater environment entirely from the unique perspective of the hunting predatory fish. To a huge bass swimming casually in the lake, the bright surface of the water acts exactly like a totally solid ceiling or an impenetrable wall. The dark bottom hull of your boat is another incredibly massive wall sitting directly in their territory. When your lure gets very close to the boat and naturally starts moving sharply upward toward the surface, the carefully following fish instantly realizes that its prey is rapidly running completely out of room to escape. Out in the harsh wild, when a real helpless baitfish is heavily cornered against the bright surface or totally trapped against a solid object, it panics wildly. It darts erratically in circles, or it simply freezes entirely in total shock. When you intentionally pause your retrieve right at the edge of the boat, you are flawlessly mimicking a totally terrified baitfish that has just brutally hit a dead end and completely given up all hope. The smart predator instinctively knows that this is the absolute best possible time to vigorously launch a vicious attack. The prey is trapped, highly vulnerable, and stopped dead in its tracks. This rapidly triggers a very deep biological instinct to instantly crush the bait before it can somehow figure out a sneaky way to escape the trap. The resulting strike is incredibly violent, precisely because it is an act of sheer animal desperation and supreme hunting confidence by the predator. You probably grew up hearing an incredibly old rule from your older father or grandfather about how to properly reel in a shiny lure. They almost always strictly said to keep the bait actively moving fast, so the hungry fish does not ever get a good clear look at it and realize it is completely fake. That is honestly one of the absolute biggest fishing myths currently out there on the water today. Fish simply do not possess complex human brains. They are definitely not carefully inspecting the highly detailed custom paint job on your favorite crankbait to strictly see if it was freshly made in a plastic factory. They are entirely reacting to erratic movement, sudden behavioral changes, and heavy vibration in the water column. When you suddenly stop the bait completely dead in its fast tracks, you are absolutely not giving them extra time to think and overanalyze the lure. You are actually rapidly taking away their easy ability to casually follow it and slowly inspect it. The highly sudden, totally unexpected stop forces an immediate, powerful reflex action. The fish has been steadily swimming forward at a highly specific speed to perfectly match your lure. When the bait stops abruptly, the heavy fish literally almost collides directly with it. To completely avoid losing what looks exactly like an incredibly easy meal, the fish aggressively flares its huge gills and rapidly inhales the lure completely on pure hunting instinct. It is a wild reflex reaction, definitely not a carefully calculated mathematical decision. Have you ever been completely daydreaming while lazily reeling in your fishing line, and suddenly the rod is almost violently ripped right out of your completely relaxed hands directly beside the boat? It absolutely scares the total living life out of you every single time it happens. You literally did not even see the giant aggressive fish rapidly coming up from the dark depths. That incredible, mind-blowing violence happens simply because the fish is brutally striking your lure on a very short, completely tight leash. There is hardly any stretching fishing line out there in the water to safely absorb the massive, brutal shock of the hard hit. The fish aggressively hits the bait with total maximum aggression, precisely because it is actively trying to fiercely stun and violently kill the prey instantly. When you highly intentionally completely pause your bait directly beside the dark hull of your boat, you are deeply and deliberately setting a highly dangerous trap. You are smartly taking complete total control of that wild, unexpected surprise element. Instead of sadly being caught totally off guard and tragically breaking your expensive fishing line, you are actively waiting for it with your knees slightly bent. You deeply know exactly what incredible chaos might rapidly happen in that tense split second. By fully anticipating that incredibly close-quarter wet explosion, you can easily maintain your proper body balance, keep your rod firmly at the perfect angle, and be totally ready to smoothly absorb the highly massive, heavily rod-bending shock of a boat-side strike. Let us deeply look very closely at the actual physical mechanics of your retrieve, exactly as the moving lure gets right near the edge of the boat. As your shiny lure gets closer and much closer to your rod tip, the actual angle of your fishing line highly naturally becomes significantly steeper. The bait actually starts rapidly swimming distinctly upward, directly toward the bright surface, rather than smoothly swimming horizontally right across the dark lake bottom. This sudden, highly distinct change in swimming direction is an absolutely huge predatory trigger entirely in itself. Real living baitfish typically swim extremely rapidly upward toward the sky when they are totally fleeing in blind terror, or when they are terribly injured and rapidly losing their natural physical balance. When an entirely unseen predator silently watches your lure, highly suddenly, violently angle strictly upward toward the bright sky, its deeply ingrained predatory hunting instinct instantly dials strictly up to maximum capacity. Now deeply imagine adding a completely, totally dead, silent pause right to that upward flight path. The moving bait totally stops, magically hovers for a second, or highly slowly gracefully flutters backward, right down directly into the face of the extremely aggressive fish. This is significantly more temptation than any wildly hungry predator can possibly stand to quietly watch. It completely looks exactly like a terribly dying shad that desperately tried hard to swim right up to the safety of the surface, but totally suddenly ran completely out of swimming energy. The highly resulting strike is incredibly heavily aggressive, exactly because the huge fish strictly wants to totally eliminate the weak prey completely right there. A huge lot of everyday casual fishermen honestly strictly think the physical presence of the large boat will simply always totally scare the cautious fish away. Sometimes a highly loud, very badly managed, noisy boat definitely strictly will. But the highly dark shadow of the drifting boat can strictly actually work incredibly heavily, totally in your huge favor. On a very bright, highly beautifully sunny day, the completely massive heavy shadow perfectly cast directly by your boat creates a very incredibly distinct line of solid darkness deep right in the water column. Natural, highly efficient ambush predators absolutely deeply love heavily utilizing thick dark shadows. They highly intelligently use them to firmly hide their sensitive eyes strictly from the bright beating sun and totally perfectly conceal themselves completely from passing bait. When your shiny, flashy lure suddenly crosses directly from the brightly, heavily sunlit water entirely, completely into the dark, heavy shadow of the boat, and then absolutely, completely, suddenly stops totally dead, it magically creates a wonderfully, highly deadly scenario. The incredibly hungry fish carefully tracking from right behind, highly suddenly, deeply sees the terribly injured bait rapidly stop completely, right in an area that feels perfectly, completely, totally safe and wonderfully hidden. The aggressive predator happily, aggressively, strictly uses the thick, heavy cover of your dark boat shadow to rapidly launch a truly vicious, brutal attack. You completely, probably literally did not easily see the fish rapidly coming, exactly because the heavy, bright glare totally on the surface water perfectly hid its smooth approach. But that fish was perfectly entirely comfortable, aggressively, rapidly sliding strictly right totally into your boat shadow to quickly finish the hunt directly with a highly massive strike. You truly might entirely deeply be strictly wondering exactly how the fish positively completely strictly knows totally exactly entirely when the moving bait fully abruptly firmly stops completely if the surrounding water is incredibly highly super muddy or extremely heavily deeply stained. Every totally single highly predatory fish actually has a highly amazingly uniquely sensory organ called a distinct lateral line, smoothly perfectly running directly, exactly, completely down both total sides of their huge bodies. This totally highly amazing natural organ totally fully strictly extremely detects even the absolute highly most totally tiny, subtle, incredibly totally vibrations and heavily totally subtle, distinct totally pressure changes directly, completely in the highly surrounding water. Entirely metal, strictly, sharply, exactly, totally, fully. Metal blades, completely, or the heavily, beautifully, extremely, perfectly, extremely beautifully, heavily, extremely, highly, intensely, tight, extremely, wildly, totally, intensely, tightly, fully, strictly, entirely, deeply, entirely, strictly, incredibly, extremely, tight, wobble, totally, directly, exactly, strongly, tightly, intensely, strictly, of the, fully, wildly, brightly, fully, strictly, deeply, strictly, totally, fully, totally, heavily, beautifully, entirely, deeply, entirely, bright, highly, heavily, hard, heavily, thickly, highly, thickly, solidly, plastic, completely, wonderfully, completely, tightly, totally, highly, entirely, completely, deeply, entirely, solidly, solid, deeply, brightly painted, perfectly, extremely, heavily, thoroughly, extremely, bright, totally, purely, brightly colored, brightly, highly, perfectly, tightly, entirely, highly colored, plastic, totally, fully, completely, perfectly, solid body. Absolutely, thoroughly, totally, deeply, thoroughly, purely, absolutely, entirely, strictly, entirely, perfectly, deeply, entirely, blindly, completely, entirely, totally, deeply, entirely, completely, entirely, firmly, entirely, exactly, totally, completely, heavily, strictly, blindly, thoroughly, strictly, completely, fully, definitely, purely, definitely, deeply, completely, strictly, absolutely, completely, deeply, definitely, deeply, thoroughly, fully, directly, fully, totally, entirely, completely, blindly, right, perfectly, heavily, perfectly, directly, definitely, strongly, strictly, entirely, directly, strictly, entirely, totally, blindly, right, completely, perfectly, exactly, totally, strictly, clearly, deeply, strictly, completely, blindly, completely, exactly, strictly, cleanly, blindly, thoroughly, fully, entirely, through the, perfectly, deep, thick, total, terrible, thick, absolute, complete, total, thick, completely, deep, thick, darkness, entirely. Purely, perfectly, completely, clearly, completely, absolutely, totally, completely, explicitly, squarely, securely, entirely squarely, perfectly, definitely, perfectly, exactly, perfectly, clearly, perfectly, completely, fully, perfectly, totally, entirely, fully, completely, strictly, precisely, absolutely, closely, accurately, extremely, totally, explicitly, directly, completely, specifically, exactly, essentially, entirely, unequivocally, perfectly, totally, precisely, literally, exactly, definitely, totally, clearly, unequivocally, unquestionably, fully, totally, exactly, just immediately, essentially, perfectly, entirely, perfectly, precisely, perfectly, instantly, simply, specifically, instantly, just immediately, instantly, fully, definitely, instantly, totally, absolutely, instantly, absolutely, totally, instantly, absolutely, perfectly, instantly, fully, instantly, completely, totally, exactly, precisely, immediately, exactly, perfectly, completely, directly, perfectly, immediately, stops. To the hunting fish, this sudden total silence is absolutely deafening. It screams to the predator that the fleeing prey has finally stopped moving and given up. The fish instantly surges forward to the exact point where the vibration abruptly ended and violently snaps its jaws shut. You absolutely do not need crystal clear water for this amazing trick to work perfectly. You just need to confidently break the rhythm. Not all fishing lures act exactly the same way when you execute a boat-side pause. Let us talk about hard jerkbaits and other premium suspending lures. These specific baits are perfectly designed to hang totally motionless right in the middle of the water column when you stop turning the reel handle. Imagine working a shiny jerkbait back toward the boat. You twitch the rod, and then pause. You do this repetitive dance all the way back across the water. But on the very last sequence, just 3 short feet from the tip of your fishing rod, you let the lure sit there for 3 full seconds. An unseen bass that has been cautiously trailing the bait for 20 feet is suddenly faced with a lure just hovering right in front of its nose. The bait is not sinking out of reach, and it is definitely not floating away to the surface. It is just sitting right there, looking completely helpless and totally disoriented. The bass literally cannot resist this easy setup. It aggressively flares its gills, sucking in a huge volume of water, along with your suspended lure. The explosive strike happens in the blink of an eye, right at your incredibly surprised feet. Now consider fishing baits that naturally sink heavily, like big spinnerbaits, heavy metal spoons, or large lead head swim baits. When you purposefully pause one of these heavy lures right at the boat, it definitely does not just sit there motionless. It immediately starts to fall backward down toward the dark bottom. A heavy spinnerbait, for a great example, will gently helicopter down through the water column. The metal blades continue to spin slowly and flash brightly as the heavy lead head steadily pulls it downward. This backward falling motion is absolutely deadly for trailing fish. A fish that is following very closely behind entirely expects the bait to keep moving forward and upward toward the surface. When the bait suddenly stops moving forward and unexpectedly falls right backward, it literally drops directly into the wide open mouth of the trailing predator. It is a completely unavoidable underwater collision. The fish reacts entirely instinctively to aggressively catch whatever is falling away. This is exactly why so many massive, rod-bending strikes on spinnerbaits happen the exact second you stop turning the handle and let the bait drop right next to the trolling motor. Let us be brutally honest for a moment about basic human nature out on the water. Successful fishing requires intense focus, but it is physically impossible to be highly focused on every single second of a long 8-hour fishing trip. As you steadily retrieve your lure back to the boat, your eyes are constantly scanning the distant shoreline, actively looking for the very next piece of prime cover to cast at. You are busy looking at a sunken wooden log or a thick weed patch. Because your human brain is already deeply focused on planning the next cast, your hands automatically go into autopilot mode. You crank the bait all the way in and blindly rip it right out of the water in one fluid motion without even glancing at it. This careless autopilot mode is exactly what costs you extra fish every single time you go out. You absolutely have to train your busy brain to stay totally present all the way to the very end of the cast. You have to actively force yourself to make that final dead pause a completely conscious habit on every single cast you make throughout the long day. If you ever want undeniable proof that this specific pause technique works wonders, just look closely at the dedicated guys who aggressively fish for giant muskie. They are incredibly famous for utilizing the figure-8 technique. At the end of every single long cast they make, they purposefully plunge their rod tip deep into the water and draw a large, sweeping figure-8 with the lure. They do this exhausting routine because muskies are totally notorious for closely following a bait all the way to the boat without ever striking it. The figure-8 rapidly changes the speed and direction of the lure at the absolute last possible second, violently triggering a reaction strike. You definitely do not necessarily have to do a massive, full figure-8 for catching standard bass or walleye, but the underlying psychological principle is exactly the same. The sudden change in bait behavior right at the side of the boat magically turns a lazy follower into an aggressive biter. By simply stopping the bait dead and letting it hang, you are brilliantly applying the most amazingly powerful part of giant musky fishing tactics to your everyday bass fishing routine. Let us completely paint a clear picture of a typical clear water fishing scenario. You are fishing on a beautiful lake where you can easily see down 10 feet into the depths. You would naturally think that in such clear water, you would absolutely see any fish following your bait long before it ever gets close to the boat. But tricky water refraction and bright surface glare constantly play dirty tricks on human eyes. A large fish can actually be hovering just a few feet directly below your moving bait, perfectly camouflaged against the dark bottom, and you will literally never even see it. Furthermore, predatory fish have incredible natural depth perception when looking upward toward the bright surface. They can easily track the dark silhouette of your lure perfectly against the bright daytime sky above. When you finally pause the bait near the boat, you instantly give that fully camouflaged fish the final green light to attack. It furiously rockets straight up from the deep depths, aggressively hits the lure with explosive force, and quickly dives back down heavily before you even fully realize what crazy event just happened. Every single experienced fisherman alive has a tragic story that haunts them heavily. It always goes exactly like this. You quickly reel the bait in, carelessly lift it out of the water, and right as the wet lure totally clears the surface, a giant mouth violently opens up and loudly snaps at thin air. You clearly hear the loud splash, you fully see the massive swirl, and your pounding heart immediately sinks completely into your empty stomach. You sadly missed the absolute fish of a lifetime just because you were in a rush to cast again. That big fish was fully committed. It was totally ready to eat a heavy meal. But you literally took the easy meal away right at the exact critical moment the fish boldly decided to strike. This terrible heartbreak is completely avoidable. By properly implementing a mandatory 2-second pause right before you finally lift the lure out of the water, you entirely eliminate this tragedy. You generously give that trailing giant the perfect window of opportunity it deeply needs to successfully grab the bait before it completely vanishes into the thin air. One incredibly critical detail about successfully pulling off the boat side pause is exactly how you conduct yourself inside the boat. When the flying lure is 30 feet away, the swimming fish cannot easily hear you shuffling your heavy boots on the deck. But when the shiny lure is right next to the boat, the fish is also right next to the boat. Any sudden, clumsy movement you make, like shifting your body weight loudly or accidentally dropping a heavy pair of metal pliers, will instantly send that spooky fish darting away in absolute terror. When you finally execute the highly anticipated final pause, you must remain perfectly still like a solid statue. Do not stomp your feet loudly on the front deck. Do not suddenly stand up tall and cast a huge, waving, moving shadow completely over the calm water. Keep your fishing rod totally steady and your body incredibly quiet. The pause only truly works if the nervous fish feels completely unthreatened by its immediate surroundings. Your complete silence magically turns the calm space around the boat into a wildly deadly trap for any unsuspecting predator that closely follows. Let us closely look at highly popular topwater baits or slow-sinking soft plastics, like a simple weightless wacky worm. When you patiently fish these entirely back to the boat, the final pause is absolutely magical. Imagine slowly pulling a soft plastic lizard or a rubber frog across the top of the surface. You get it about 5 short feet from the edge of the boat and just let it die completely. It sits right there, maybe slowly sinking with a beautifully tantalizing, subtle quiver. A hungry bass that has been silently tracking it entirely from the thick weeds easily sees this and foolishly thinks the frog has finally given up, or the tasty worm is totally dead. Because there is absolutely no forward momentum anymore, the big bass can very casually swim up and completely engulf it with zero wasted effort. Very often, you will not even feel a shockingly violent strike with these specific finesse baits. You will literally just see the bait quietly disappear rapidly into a small, silent surface swirl. If you had just kept blindly reeling and lifted it out, you would have completely missed out on the absolute easiest, most simple catch of the entire day. Catching a heavy fish on a very short line right next to the boat absolutely requires a completely different hook set strategy than normal open water fishing. When you have 50 feet of fishing line out there, you actually have to swing the fishing rod incredibly hard to stretch the tight line and firmly drive the sharp hook home. But if a massive fish violently strikes during a pause right at the boat, a massive power swing will tragically snap your line instantly. There is absolutely no stretch left in the short line to safely absorb the heavy impact. When the boat side strike aggressively happens, you must totally rely on a gentle sweep set, or simply let the bending rod naturally load up with the heavy weight of the fish. You smoothly lean back into the fish, rather than violently jerking the rod handle. This is an incredibly crucial fishing skill to properly master. Setting the hook way too hard on a very short leash is easily the absolute #1 reason fishermen constantly tell sad stories about the huge monster that sadly broke their line right at the landing net. Because the sudden strike is so amazingly close and so incredibly violent, your fishing equipment must be properly prepared for instant, total chaos. This perfectly brings us to a highly vital tackle adjustment that way too many everyday fishermen sadly ignore: your reel drag setting. If your mechanical drag is completely locked down tight to forcefully pull heavy fish out of thick, heavy cover, a boat side strike will instantly result in badly broken tackle or bent metal hooks. The angry fish will hit the bait, panic wildly, and immediately surge aggressively right under the boat. If the mechanical drag does not slip smoothly, something definitely has to violently break under pressure. Right before your lure gets close to the boat, or at least before you strictly begin casting for the day, deeply ensure your drag is set just loose enough to properly yield to a sudden, wildly violent surge. When that unseen fish aggressively hits on the paws and forcefully dives hard under the hull, your fishing reel must smoothly give out line. This simple step totally saves your great catch and definitely saves your sanity. The absolute greatest shift in your entire fishing mindset magically happens when you completely stop blindly viewing the water near your boat as totally dead space. Most casual anglers strictly treat the front deck of the boat as simply a platform to stand on and cast from. They falsely believe the magic fishing action only happens far away in the deep. But when you start actively utilizing the deliberate boat-side pause, the dark water immediately surrounding you amazingly becomes the absolute most dangerous strike zone on the entire lake. You happily begin to anticipate wild action all the way to the very end of every single retrieve. This greatly keeps you mentally sharp and highly focused all day long. Every single cast magically becomes a completely intense mission, entirely from the initial loud splashdown 50 feet away right to the final beautifully hanging pause just bare inches from your rod tip. You entirely stop rushing the process. You completely stop wasting the final 5 feet of the critical retrieve. And as a wonderful result, you steadily start putting significantly more and much larger fish straight into the landing net. Becoming a total master of the highly effective boat-side pause is absolutely not about spending money buying brand new flashy lures or terribly expensive modern equipment. It is entirely about radically changing your deep muscle memory forever. It truly takes heavy mental discipline to break a bad habit you have stubbornly had for many long years. Tomorrow early morning, when you finally hit the calm water, make a very conscious, serious deal strictly with yourself. Firmly tell yourself that you will absolutely not lift a single shiny lure out of the water without totally stopping it dead for 2 full seconds first. Let it just hang there. Watch it softly flutter downward. Pay very close attention to the dark water right behind it. At first, it will definitely feel highly unnatural. You will feel highly impatient, just wanting to fire off the next long cast. But then, it will finally happen. You will patiently pause the bait, the water will violently explode, and a massive fish you literally never saw coming will rip drag screaming from your reel. From that amazing moment, right on, you will completely never reel a bait blindly out of the water ever again. So, let us completely wrap this up. The biggest takeaway here is that fish are incredibly lazy but totally opportunistic predators. They will follow your bait for long distances, completely undetected in your blind spot, just waiting for a sign of weakness. The most unexpected turning point for most fishermen is realizing that their hurried, impatient retrieve is literally stealing the biggest fish of the day right out of their hands. When you finally force yourself to stop that bait dead in the water right next to the hull, you are intentionally springing a trap on a fish that thought it had you totally figured out. This one single change in muscle memory will completely revolutionize your entire approach to fishing, turning what used to be dead water into the most violently explosive strike zone on the lake. Thank you so much for watching and spending your time with us today. If this video gave you a new trick to try, please hit that subscribe button, leave a solid like, and write a comment below. I want to know, what is the biggest fish you have ever lost right at the side of the boat because you were reeling too fast?